He's on the run from the law, falsely accused of murdering his... Wait. Oh, got my scripts mixed up here. Here we go. This makes more sense. The Movie Wire Podcast with host Justin Henson. Hear Justin's movie verdict wherever you listen to podcasts. Tune in to The Movie Wire today.
Mr. Spock ran an analysis of this delta. It's not just a badge, it's also a communicator. You just press right here.
The flipping it open's the best part.
I like ours better, too.
Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Talking Smack, where we talk superheroes, movies, animation, and comics. I am your host, Josh Scar, and joining me this week is my number one, Matt. Matt, how you doing?
I'm doing good. How are you?
Can't complain. It's been a couple weeks since we recorded, and it's really weird that we had that much of a buffer, but that's how the What You Doings do for us, and glad to be back in the saddle.
Yeah, glad to be here and talking the month of Talking Matt.
Well, you said that's what you wanted for your birthday, so that's what we're doing.
Yeah.
Next week we're going to be talking more comics, and hopefully we'll be having a guest join us. We did intend on having Leo Allen join us for this week, as he is a big Star Trek fan, but unfortunately, just scheduling could not happen, or we couldn't make it work with scheduling. And then also Alex, our editor, Alex, I apologize in advance. I forgot to swap out my podcasting chair. I realized that when I hit play on the intro. And so if there's any extra squeaking on my end, I apologize profusely to both Alex and the listener.
I don't. I hope Alex has to deal with a lot on my end.
All right. Well, this week, as part of Matt's big birthday month, we are talking his favorite thing in the world, Star Trek. More specifically, Star Trek Strange New Worlds, Season 2.
Season 2, baby.
Season 2 of Star Trek Strange New Worlds was the only reason I finally took Matt's advice and started watching Star Trek Beyond Lower Decks, just because because we will eventually talk about it, the Lower Decks crossover episode.
Yes. Yeah. Before we get into it proper, though, I just had something just to speak for myself a little bit. Maybe you can co-sign this or not if you want. I support the strikes, and I'm not trying to violate any of the asks of the union. So we're trying our best. I'm trying my best. Reasonable people can disagree reasonably. I'm trying to be as supportive as I can in that regard. So hopefully you don't feel that we're violating any of that stuff. Maybe, like I said, maybe we didn't have to say this at all, but it was on my mind, so I just wanted to throw it out there. A couple of things before I get off the soapbox. One of those watch along podcasts that I am very fond of is called A More Civilized Age. It covers. It started out covering Star Wars Clone Wars. Recently was covering Rebels, and then decided to pause that during the strike. And they recently did an episode with Adam Conover from Adam Ruins Everything, other stuff. You've probably seen my College Humor, things like that.
And I believe he's a president of the Writers Guild.
I believe he's a negotiator in some capacity. He's
a union representative at the very least.
He's been very, very vocal about the strike and what's at stake. And they did an episode interviewing him. Really great conversation that helps if you're kind of curious what's going on, what's at stake. He really breaks it down in a useful and entertaining way. That was episode 68, I believe it was, from a couple weeks ago. They're at amorecivilizedage.net or any podcatcher you get, whatever you're listening to this right now, you can probably find it there. And also, if you're supporting the strikes and you feel so moved, they have something called the Entertainment Community Fund that is like kind of a lifeline for people who may be not millionaires who are still affected by this strike to maybe get some funds. So that's my spiel. Like I said, that's just speaking for myself. I would have felt weird if I didn't address it. So we can co-sign that or not.
Yeah, I co-sign it too. And I do also appreciate you mentioning the fund, because there are some people out there who I know that think that, oh, they live in Hollywood, therefore they must make $250,000 a year minimum, which
Yeah, right.
we know that's not true just based on the writer's strike alone. Those people are making like $26,000 a
In some
year
cases, yeah.
in some cases, and they're producing like high quality stuff because it's what they do.
Yeah, it's the
And
stuff we
that's
like, and we wouldn't be sitting here if it wasn't for those people.
exactly there is no entertainment without writers. And I mean that even goes as far into like the things we've talked about with like comic books, where the
Yep.
writers and like guys like Ed Brubaker with the Winter Soldier, I think he went on record as saying that Marvel cut him a disgustingly low, like I think $5,000 check off
Yep.
of their nearly $800 million movie in the Winter Soldier, and he also
Yeah.
got a cameo in the movie. So like, woo.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it's tough out there, especially, we could get into the atrocities of comics going way back if we really wanted to.
Yeah.
But so if you're listening and you are maybe of the opinion that these people are rich shitheads asking for too much money, I would encourage you to listen to that podcast I dropped, or anything Adam Conover has been talking about. Like, he really gets into like who the people are that are striking, like the bulk of the people who are making this stuff, and it's really clarifying, I think, even if you're someone like me who was already kind of inclined to support the strikes. Great episode. It's not 4 hours long. It's good though. Anyway.
Yeah. And Adam
Like I said,
Conover is a good listen on most anything anyway. Dude knows
Yeah.
his stuff, and he's also
great.
willing to be wrong, which is really important in today's world. So now you can start salivating again. We can start talking about Star Trek Strange New Worlds. If you don't mind, I think I'll take the early lead on this one and just talk about how this show is really relaxing in a fun way. Like it does. We talked about this with Becky last week in What You Doing, where this does release weekly, but each episode also leads itself to be watched like one day at a time, or every couple days, or once a week. And I remember mentioning in our Discord where I can't remember exactly what followed up with it, but there was like a really lighthearted episode that was immediately followed up with an Alien / The Thing style episode. And I think that was like the episode before the season finale as well.
Yeah.
So like episode 9, out of nowhere, there's just this really tense episode where Ricky, who does not do horror, I can do some horror despite the joking that we do. Like I really enjoy the Alien movies. I enjoy the Predator movies. The Thing starts pushing boundaries because I don't like body horror.
Yeah.
But like that episode, I was like, oh yeah, this is an Alien homage. Yeah, let's get into it. But it does take like a day or two to kind of like process the episode and be ready to move on. It's not a bingeable show, and I say that in a good way.
Sure. Yeah. Well, and they could. It's funny that you mentioned the one, like the emotional roller coaster, because like I think this second season that just wrapped up takes that and like triples down on it, right? So like,
yeah, the second episode is just whew.
Yeah, and if you don't know, Strange New Worlds is Star Trek. It's about the adventures of the Enterprise in the years before the original series. Captain Pike, from the one episode where he was like a mangled guy in a chair, before all that happens to him, and like so it's very classic style Star Trek where every episode is there's continuing through lines like what's going on with this character, what's their deal. But like every episode is like, oh, there's a weird problem, we're going to solve it, and then next week we're on to something else. But like you were talking about the Lower Decks crossover, and this season does this thing where it's like, here's an episode where they cross over with the goofy cartoon show with all the lightheartedness that suggests, and then 2 episodes later is their big musical episode. And the thing that's sandwiched in between them is this like story about like the horrors and traumas of war that has this like very ambiguously dark ending that is like so tense and to repeat myself, dark. So it's like
Yeah,
you watch.
that episode, Under the Cloak of War, it retells the story of the Klingon War from the perspective of Dr. Mbenga and Nurse Chapel. And the ending of that episode, which will say up ahead, spoiler warning for season 2 of Star Trek Strange New Worlds.
Yeah, basically any episode is fair game.
Yeah, and season 1. But Under the Cloak of War ends with this really ambiguous ending, like Matt said, where a Klingon he's not really a representative, he's a defector.
Yeah, he's like an ambassador. He's like someone who defected from the
Ambassador.
Klingons, and he's like become an ambassador, and he is like, a notorious war criminal from the time of the Klingon War, which was somewhat depicted in the first season of Star Trek Discovery. And it's like someone that Mbega has like sort of kind of directly interacted with in the past. So there's this like, the whole thing is like, is this guy on the level? Can Mbenga like move on from his trauma? Like, does this guy deserve a second chance? All that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway,
and the answer is the guy pushes Mbenga a little too far, and it seems like Nurse Chapel and Mbenga lie under oath or on official record at the very least to cover up what happened.
Well, yeah, that's it's such a great scene, and like, so the whole thing is the climax of the episode is, this guy, this Klingon former like warlord, is like trying to befriend Mbenga as like someone who was on the other side of the war. It's like a kind of a PR coup for him, and Mbenga's like wanting none of it. So he goes to like give him one more chance to like be friends with him, and Mbenga's like, I don't want anything to do with it. And it cuts to this thing where, in the Enterprise sick bay, the doctor's like office, like his personal office, is like covered in frosted glass, right? So it cuts to them struggling on the other side of the frosted glass. You can't really see what's happening, and it's very ambiguous. It's like there's like a knife involved in the scene where Mbenga just has this like ceremonial knife, and it's like, okay, well, did Mbenga go in, intending to kill this guy? Did it happen on accident? Did the Klingon do something? Was it
maybe Mbenga just had like this weird out of body PTSD experience, and again, that maybe they're just covering for it. Chapel and Mbenga are covering it. We don't know. It's wonderfully ambiguous in a horrible way.
Yeah, it's really great, and it's one of those things where like, the Saturday before was a Saturday of Comic-Con, and they dropped the big Lower Decks crossover as a surprise on like a non-standard night. Usually comes out on Thursdays. And then they were like, surprise, it's Comic-Con. Lower Decks episode's out today on Saturday. So it's like you're coming down from this high. It's like, oh, wow, we just watched this really wonderful thing where they like kind of nailed it with the crossover with, the animated characters coming to live action and doing really wonderfully. And then just a few days later, you're like, oh God, that was the most intense thing I've seen in a minute. Well, let me ask you, because like you mentioned, you don't really truck with Star Trek that much for whatever reason. This is kind of an early, relatively new thing for you. So like, how did this season hit you? Like how did you like it? I mean, you liked it clearly, but
yeah, I think there's more good than bad, or more good than meh, maybe, for lack of a better word. I don't think there's an episode where I was like, that sucked, that was not good. The very first episode, I think, was a little bit cliched for Star Trek.
Okay.
There are some things in there, like we get a little hint of the Mbenga Chapel stuff where they take that weird, let's call it venom from Batman.
Yeah, the magic green juice
serum. It's like this hyper adrenaline that just allows them to not feel fear and makes them super soldiers for a short period of time. The episode felt a little cliched, where it's like, oh, there's a new person here. There's this person that's off the ship and we'll meet up with them. And it was a little scattered, but it just didn't quite land for me in terms of like, I walked away from that one feeling really great. But it was a fine episode. I felt like it was like, oh yeah, that's just another Trek episode. And then we touched a little bit on Ad Astra per Aspera, which is the courtroom drama episode, which is just that one. Like I almost cried in that one because of like all of the undertones that they brought to the forefront with that episode.
When Star Trek is good, it's really good at that stuff. Well, okay, let me phrase it this way. When it does that kind of thing, that sort of lawyer drama, courtroom drama kind of thing, it's usually really good at it. So like I was happy to see that, this basically lived up to that. Like it's a really wonderful little episode about, the character Una, played by Rebecca Romijn, is like genetically modified, which is a big thing in Star Trek, that the Federation doesn't like those people who are, so like she gets found out and gets put on trial, and it's a whole thing about,
yeah, wasn't that a cliffhanger from the end of season 1?
Yes, yeah, at the end of season 1 she gets found out and arrested basically. And that's a thing that they're tying it into like the Wrath of Khan stuff, where Khan was famously an augment, but they touch on that in like Deep Space Nine, things like that. So it's like a long time Star Trek thing that I think they dealt with it really well, and it was a really wonderful little thing that it's not like a thing that the show was good, but that's the kind of thing where you're like, oh well, yeah, this is the kind of thing Star Trek nails, so you want to see them nail it, and they did. And in my perpetual quest to get you to #watch Star Trek, if you like that episode, I have some other ones I can recommend to you.
Honestly, there's an episode of The Orville that I could recommend to you that hits a lot of that same stuff.
We can't do that. We can't get into that today.
This is the Star Trek episode, I know, but The Orville is kind of, I do think it's a bit more like Lower Decks, where it's more of a love letter to Star Trek, where they do a lot of the tropey things. Like they open up an episode where it's the crew, and then all of a sudden this rando appears, and it's like, oh, hey, rando, we've known you forever. What a wonderful time we're having. Oh, you're dead. Or, oh, yeah, you did the thing that makes the bad thing happen in this episode.
Yeah. I mean, that's the impression I've gotten too, where like it is, I think it hits right before Discovery kicks off like this new era of Star Trek. And, Discovery is not to some people's tastes. So, the Orville seems to me to be something that is very knowingly and like intentionally homaging the Next Generation in that way. And, I haven't really seen it, but, to the degree that show is great, that's not a bad thing necessarily. And I suppose apparently they do it very well. There's a guy called Bortus. I know that's pretty wild. That's a weird name.
Yeah, he's a Klingon like character, if I'm remembering correctly.
It sounds like a Klingon name.
Yeah,
Bortus.
And then there's I can't remember the android's name. He's not really an android either, but there's I think in the 3rd season where they just basically did like 4 or 5 movie length episodes. There's one character who's the android. He's part of basically what is the Borg. But they're more interested in like understanding or collecting information, not necessarily people. They're not interested in like what's the term that the Borg use? Assimilate.
Yeah.
They're not interested in assimilating because they're also extraordinarily racist. They're like, we're the epitome of evolution as these higher being robots. Like you organics can go rot in hell. We're fine. But the android on the Orville is there to like understand humans and try and like gain a better understanding of it, so that he can go back to his collective and be like, hey, I learned this and now we're smarter for it. But he becomes more human through his time. So it's really good stuff in my opinion.
Yeah. I cannot believe you pivoted this to the Orville talk. But it's one of those things where enough people that I know, people I know who like really like Star Trek and were skeptical of it, have watched it and gone, oh, this is actually really good. Plus, you know, friends like you who don't have that frame of reference and watched it and also enjoyed it. So like, it feels like one of those things where at some point I'm going to have to give it a shot, but I'm like, most of the time when I'm like in that mood, I'm just like, oh, I could definitely watch random episode of TNG again for the 100th time, you know, like, so one day I will get around to it, but I'm just always like, I just reach for a Star Trek when I'm in that mood. So
yeah, I would recommend it. Just I would say give it like, if you start at season 1, give it like 4 episodes.
okay.
I know that's like a 4-hour commitment. Essentially, it's like 45 minutes. So like maybe more 3.5 hours. But if you're not feeling it after 4 episodes, I don't think it's something that you'd change your mind on.
Sure.
I think the first couple episodes are a little rough just because they are trying to find that balance of like, let's make modern references here, but also pretend we're in the future.
Right. And the Seth MacFarlane of it all, I'm sure.
I'm not quite sure where your Seth MacFarlane distaste comes from. I can understand from like years of Family Guy running way too long.
He just seems like a really smarmy guy. So like whenever he's like doing something where he's playing something relatively straight, I'm like, man, I don't want to look at you for 45 minutes or the 2 hours of this movie or whatever it is, you know?
I don't know. I think he plays the captain really well. He finds a good balance. But let's get back to Star Trek, because I'm looking at the episode list here for season 2, and I know I said there wasn't any episodes that I really didn't like. I forgot about Among the Lotus Eaters.
Okay.
That's the episode where they land on a planet and like the radiation in the atmosphere or something causes them to forget.
Yeah.
And they're lured back to this planet because a previous crew member is protected in the castle, and so he remembers everything but everyone outside of it. And like it's not even the concept. We talked about this in the Discord. It's not even the concept that is behind this episode that really irks me or makes me think this episode is not that great. It's the idea that they keep using La'an gets injured at some point in the episode, and they're like, oh man, she's gonna bleed out, she's dying, she doesn't have long. And then they take 5 minutes for a soliloquy, or they take 10 minutes to have a conversation about this guy who doesn't want to remember where his family is. He would rather be saved from the hurt of knowing what happened to his family than have to remember. And
yeah,
and like La'an's injury is just like, I'm fine, guys. Just we won't worry about it until we talk about it again.
Yeah, there's one moment, and I think it's the one you mentioned that it really stands out, where it's like, like you said, there's a castle where like they believe in this like this weird thing where they don't remember anything, and they've only got like this weird culture that's sort of
it's like a weird caste system where like the lowlies can't remember, and it's fine. It's a blessing that you can't remember.
Yeah,
only the important people can remember and have to remember.
Yeah, and they believe that like the memories are literally stored in the castle, right? So like the mission is we go in and we get the memories back, and then we find out who we are and stuff, right? So like you mentioned, La'an gets injured, and then they're like, that's part of the impetus to like convince this guy to help, and because Mbenga is with him, he's a doctor. He's like aware enough of like his skills, like his innate skills, to realize I'm a doctor. If I can get my memories back, I can help this woman and like save her. So they're like going to the castle, and they, are scouting it out, and then they stop at like to rest for a second, and then that turns into a scene where like the guest star of the week, they get into his whole deal, and that's the one moment in that episode where I'm like, gosh, you guys should have talked about this like earlier, like
you couldn't talk about this on the way. I
feel while you're walking. It's a framing issue, I think.
Yeah, and I think they could have easily worked around that. They didn't need to put La'an in this like she's gonna bleed out and die moment. What they I feel like they easily could have just been like, we're motivated to get our memories because we have this memento around Pike's neck. Mbenga has his learning. He's like, I'm a doctor, but I don't know what I'm doing if I'm going to do anything right now. I need to know, or I need to have my memories. And La'an could just, you could have like that intrinsic base personality that's just driving them. Like that's what
Yeah.
makes them Starfleet. That's what makes them worthy of the Enterprise. But instead they have this weird pressing issue of La'an's going to die, but it's not that bad.
Yeah, I think I think you kind of want that, something like that, just because that's how you get the exposition guy on board, right? So like I get it. I just think that scene in particular probably just could have used, like you mentioned, if it's filmed more that they're like on the way, right? Or
Make it a walk and talk. Yeah.
yeah, or if they frame it differently, or if the injury's not as bad, right? Because like it happens again a little bit later in the big climax where Pike is the only one who makes it inside, and he's fighting off this former ensign or whatever he was who has like taken over this planet. There's scenes where they stop and they're talking, but it's like it makes sense in the moment for me because Pike is he's doing the mission and they're like in their conflict, or he's like just realized that no, they don't actually have physical memories here, and what's he going to do about it? Where like it's all wrapped up in the climax of the episode, so it's not like you're not thinking about that she's like, you're sitting here talking to this guy and she's dying, right? In the same way that you are in the previous scene that we've been talking about. That episode's interesting just because like the setup feels like really like classic ass like original series like Star Trek shit. I think it's, aside from like the stuff we've mentioned, I think it's a very solid episode. It is weird that like that's like maybe the main like Pike spotlight that we get this season.
Mm.
And it's like
Yeah,
an episode where he doesn't have his memories, right? So it's like only sort of Pike,
Yeah.
So it's a little weird. And like there's a degree to which I've heard maybe Anson Mount, who plays Pike, he might have been on like paternity leave or something. So maybe that's why, but it feels like he's a little more de-emphasized this season, which is fine because like,
there's a whole crew of interesting people.
Yeah, every episode focuses on somebody else. So like it's, but it is a thing where it is a little weird where when you notice it, you're like, oh yeah, like they get a reason to write him out in the first episode, and they also find a reason for him like not to be involved in the court case in the lawyer episode, and then his big episode that he gets is, he's in it very much, but he's playing himself without his memories. So it's an interesting little thing. But I do think, I like that episode, but I think it is one of the weaker ones of the season because, looking at this episode list, so much of the rest of it is like, that's a good episode. Like everything else is like top tier.
Yeah. Once you get to episode 5 in this season, like, I don't know that there's a bad or even like mediocre episode in the rest of the season. Cause the next episode is Charades, where Spock becomes human, which I do want to talk about that. We'll come back to it. Lost in Translation is the one where Uhura is hearing this weird pulsing sound, and they're mining what is it, deuterium?
Yeah.
And then you've got those old scientists, which is the Lower Decks crossover, Under the Cloak of War, which is the one we already talked about with Mbenga and the Klingon ambassador. Subspace Rhapsody, the musical episode, which again I do want to talk about before we get out of here today, and then the season finale, Hegemony, which is just another really good. It's like almost 28 days later kind of episode.
Yeah, it's like a big action sort of heist or siege episode with, again, like the alien one you mentioned from season 1, also featuring the Gorn, who are the big lizard guys. And then the episode before the Lotus Eaters is Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow, which is like the La'an time travel episode where she goes.
Yeah, and that one plays a big role throughout the season.
Yeah, and it's also
or
just
at least
a great,
it ripples throughout.
A great episode for is it Christina Chong, who plays La'an, because she finds herself as like in a sort of in an alternate timeline where something has happened in the past that changed the present. So she has to go back to the late 21st century to figure out where the diversion is and stop it. And she's got like that presence version of James Kirk ends up there with her. So like it's sort of like a two-person like buddy adventure. And just both of them, I think Paul Wesley as James Kirk this season is really great. La'an is phenomenal, especially in that episode. So like really strong episodes throughout. So like when we're talking about, Among the Lotus Eaters being relatively weak comparatively, like it's still high praise, I think.
Fine, but
yeah, it's still high praise, I think. Like I think at least for my money.
Yeah, I think it like I said, there's just this weird process that they decided to do with Among the Lotus Eaters, where the ticking clock is someone is dying, but the episode doesn't care enough to make us care about that, because they're like, we need a ticking clock. Here's what it is, and then here's the story. And if you can kind of remove the ticking clock element from it, I think it is a pretty solid and interesting episode. But they just focus so heavily on that ticking clock a couple of times that it's like, excuse you?
Yeah, right. So, you mentioned a couple episodes that you wanted to make sure we talked about. So, like, I guess you take it away. Like, where do you want to start?
Let's start with the very next episode after Among the Lotus Eaters was Charades. Spock and Nurse Chapel get caught in a weird... It's not quite a black hole. It's like a weird anomaly that's on the surface of a planet while they're on a transporter, or what are those? The shuttle.
They're shuttles
ship,
when they're the little ships are shuttles.
Yeah, and they get caught in a vortex with the anomaly, and the anomaly decides to fix them because they apparently died in this accident that was caused by them. They couldn't fix Spock because he was half Vulcan, half human. And so they just turned him full human because he was with a human on board the shuttle. And T'Pring, much to her wonderful timing,
his fiance decided,
this is a pretty straightforward follow-up from an episode in season 1. T'Pring has notified Spock that her parents need to have their wedding. It's not their wedding rites. It's like some kind of ceremonial engagement.
Yeah, it's like an engagement thing where they have to like pass some tests and like meet the approval of the parents, and like her parents, they're also Vulcans, are like,
and they're also racist.
Yeah, they're like sort of disapproving of Spock to begin with, and like low-key racist. So it's like a very high, for their relationship, it's very high stakes. So it's like a real hijinks episode where like Spock becomes human, fully human, at like the worst possible time when he has to be like at his most Vulcan.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I thought that episode was a lot of fun because who's the guy that plays Spock? Ethan Peck.
Yeah,
he plays Spock so well, and then being able to pull off playing human in a sense of the idea that Spock has never really fully accepted his human side and allowed him to really feel, because that's been part of his struggle going into this episode throughout the season, is that there's a moment late in season 1 where he lets his rage out. I think it might be the alien episode.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Where he just like lets his rage loose, which for a Vulcan is very dangerous. That if I know my Trek lore, that is basically what created the Romulans. The Romulans accepted their emotion.
I think it's something along those lines, where there was a split, and there was, in the backstory of Trek, there was a period where like, Vulcans have emotions, but they're like very powerful in terms of like the way that the intensity, not like they shoot laser beams or whatever.
Yeah.
So like there was a period in their past where like it basically almost brought them to ruin. So the way they corrected was, oh, we have to lock this down. So it's like Vulcans still have emotions, but they're like totally, they
it's like in Futurama,
pursue logic over anything else.
Yeah, it's like in Futurama they have the Neutronians, or the neutral people, where there's that famous line of like the guy who sees his death in front of him as Zap Brannigan's about to crash a ship in front of him. He's like, "Tell my wife I said hello."
Yeah, it is not unlike that to some degree. Yeah, and the thing with this episode is that the conceit is that Spock is sort of at like with the human part of him is sort of like at a younger emotional development stage. So he's like almost like a teenager, which maybe sounds weird or bad, but like it's an excuse for him for Ethan Peck to like do all this goofy, funny stuff and like have these emotional outbursts. And the whole thing is centered around them trying to like teach Spock to fake being a Vulcan so he can make it through this dinner or whatever. And, a very just comic hijinks.
He tries bacon for the first time, which is a great trope for the whole, like, I've never experienced things before. What's something I should experience? Oh, it's bacon.
Yeah.
I'm going to overindulge and throw up.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a great moment where like, I can't remember the exact context, but like I think T'Pring's mom is like really laying into him in a Vulcan kind of way. And he like excuses himself. And there's this moment where he just is like punching the air and like
he excuses himself and he just starts throwing haymakers into the air because he's like, God fucking damn it, lady.
The most impotent like expression of rage. And it's just like it sounds stupid when I describe it, but it's such a funny, like hilarious bit of physical acting from Ethan Peck, who, like you say, most of the time is playing this buttoned up character. So it's a really fun episode for him to like really cut loose in that way.
Yeah, and it's also just funny because it's Spock. It's the guy who is supposed to be as buttoned up as possible, and in the those old scientists with the lower deck people, Boimler even says like you're smiling, and which like that whole bit's great.
God, yes.
Like, he's smiling and laughing. Like I think he might have been body snatched or something. So it's just really funny to see Spock in different circumstances, and I think the writers of the show, or at least the showrunners of the show, really understand the benefit to putting Spock in unique situations, especially as we get close to talking about the musical episode.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a really Charades is a really wonderful episode. That's all I got.
I do have to say that I know in the Christopher Pine, J.J. Abrams movies that Winona Ryder was Spock's mom, but like, holy cow, did they choose a wonderfully attractive woman to play Spock's mom for this show? I was like extraordinarily distracted by the attractiveness of Spock's mom.
The name of the actor escapes me. It's Mia Kirshner, I believe. Yes. And she actually also first appeared in Discovery. So this is sort of an inherited casting from that. But she's very fun in this episode because she's a human woman who is married to Spock's father. So the whole conceit is like she's here to help him basically because Vulcans can't lie. And that's basically what they're trying to get him to do for this charade. The whole thing is like she has to teach him how to lie and fake it, and she's very fun. And like you say, she's not an unattractive woman.
Yeah, she is not hard on the eyes at all. Is there anything you really want to say about Lost in Translation, the follow-up episode to that, where Uhura is hearing the weird pulsating?
Not a ton. Like it's just a solid episode, and it's another episode that features Paul Wesley as Kirk, but he's teaming up with Uhura this time. And there's some creepy imagery. It's just a fun kind of episode where they have a problem and they're going to solve it, and it's good. But it's not one of the. I was going to say it's not a standout of the season, which feels like it's a slam, but it's not. But just because the standout episodes are so good that I'm not, I don't have a ton of thoughts to ramble with like the other episodes we've been talking about.
Yeah, and this episode is a little bit more Uhura centric, which is not to say it shouldn't be talked about, but it's more follow up from season 1. She's still dealing with the loss of Hemmer, and I think that this is also the episode where she and is it Pelia?
Yeah.
Those two connect finally, and it took 6 episodes, but like I do feel like that's part of the running theme with this season is that everyone kind of gets a moment with Pelia to be like, oh, she's all right.
Yeah, right. And And Pelia is
She's the granny from the Addams Family, isn't she? Carol Kane is her
Carol
name.
Kane. Thank you. I'm so embarrassed because 10 minutes ago, if you just asked me off the top of my head, I could have named it.
She plays Valerie in The Princess Bride, which I believe that's the liar
Yeah.
in the hut with Billy Crystal. And then she is the granny from Addams Family Values. She's also the ghost of Christmas Present in Scrooged.
Yeah, and she's great, and she's mostly kind of a recurring guest character, but she's just a delightful little weirdo as the new chief engineer of the Enterprise, just showing up and doing her like Carol Kane weirdness when she needs to. It's great. And she's a part of that episode with Uhura, and Paul Wesley as Kirk is great. I think they maybe kind of lean on him a little too much this season, considering, but it's hard to complain when he's very fun and doing his own kind of spin on this really classic character.
Yeah, I have no complaints about him as a character as he's represented, since I don't really have a great tie to the oh geez, you're gonna punch me in the face through the screen. I'm forgetting his name.
Shatner.
William Shatner, yes, the William Shatner iteration, or
he's a
even
piece
the
of
Chris
shit,
Pine
so it doesn't
iteration.
matter.
But the one thing I will say about Paul Wesley in the role is I jokingly refer to this show as Buff Trek, just because of how buff Anson Mount and Ethan Peck are in their roles as Pike and Spock, respectively. Paul Wesley, he's not unfit. I'm sure he's very lean, if not toned, but his body doesn't fit with everyone else's in the show. Like if there's anyone he fits in body type with, it's Jack Quaid, who's a guest episode in the next episode. And he doesn't interact with him at all. But
he's a little lanky.
He is, compared to everyone else, and it just makes him look that much leaner. And I joke about it every time he shows up on screen with Ricky. I'm just like, he doesn't fit in this show.
Everyone on the show is like unbelievably attractive
and unbelievably talented.
Yeah.
The Subspace Rhapsody, like, let's jump ahead a few episodes into Subspace Rhapsody, the musical episode. I think the only person who doesn't really sing all that well, which he still doesn't sound bad, is Anson Mount. And like you said, maybe he had his role limited because of his paternity leave or family leave.
Yeah, and I do sort of wonder, I think this episode draws a lot of natural comparisons to Once More with Feeling, which was the Buffy the Vampire Slayer musical episode, which I think in a lot of ways is like the pioneer of TV shows doing the musical episode. And that episode of that show really kind of played toward the strengths of its cast rather than, making people do things they weren't comfortable with. Where, famously Allison Hannigan as Willow, she has like 2 sung lines in that episode because like she was not comfortable singing, right? So they wrote around it. And I do kind of wonder if that, and like Mbenga doesn't have that much either. I wonder if it's
I thought he sounded really good. Like maybe he didn't like singing, but I thought for the most part I was like, I need to hear more of him.
Yeah. But I do sort of wonder if it was a thing where we're like, what's your skill level, what's your comfort level, and then kind of wrote to those strengths. And I think the one sort of half solo that Pike has is maybe the one, like you kind of suggest, is like the one time that you kind of see the seams, right, where it's like, oh, maybe he's not the best at this.
Yeah. But I mean, yeah, I don't know, but it was really fun episode. I don't think any of the songs are like, oh my gosh, I need the album right away. At least for me, music is an art, obviously, so therefore it is open to interpretation and people take it different ways. I think the episode is fun. I don't think it would be something I come back to just because I want to hear those songs. The only reason I haven't gone back to Once More with Feeling in a handful of years is because of the specter of Joss Whedon hanging over Buffy anymore. But I will say that the episode, no one sings something that doesn't sound like it wouldn't come from that character, if that makes any sense. So
yeah, it's a very competent episode. And I did recently rewatch that Buffy episode, and I think that episode is like a much stronger musical.
Yeah.
But this is still very competent, I think, where, I don't think the music is as good, the songs aren't as good as that, but it's still a thing where it's like, well, they went for it and they more or less pulled it off, which is like,
Yeah, and I talked about it last week where like when something happens to be a musical that you weren't expecting to be a musical, there's like a little moment of dread. And I was really curious what they're going to do with this episode because they released a teaser trailer and all they ever did was do the fanfare. Like there was
yeah, they didn't show
nothing.
anything about that. Yeah.
Yeah, there was no melodies really that came with it. It was just alluding to the fact that like Pike was about to sing because he did that musical thing where he raises his hands just before he starts to belt
Yeah,
out
right.
a solo. And it's like, oh man, what are they going to do with this? And like, I think the only disappointment that I had in this episode, which as you were already talking about, I don't think it was fully necessary. Maybe someone just didn't feel comfortable with it. I was really hoping we would have gotten a Spock and Chapel duet,
Yeah,
but that wasn't the focus of the episode. So like, I understand why it didn't happen.
yeah, and that plays into some of the stuff, like some of the minor weaknesses of this season, I think, which we can get into later. But it is interesting, like the way that they handle the Spock and Chapel stuff, specifically in this episode and the episodes around it. But yeah, and it's just kind of fun, just because again, I can't. It's hard not to compare this to the Buffy episode because I think it is very similar in a lot of ways. Like, not least of which is that it's an episode where everybody is aware that like the problem of the episode is we're stuck in a musical. How do we get out of it? What is happening, right? As opposed to something where, like, a Scrubs musical episode, which is still also pretty good, is about the conceit is, oh, this person has a weird illness that causes them to see everyone singing, as opposed to like, it doesn't, it's not a world that lends itself to, oh, somebody cast a magic spell or a science thing happened and we're all singing now, right? So you have to kind of find ways around it. So that's part of the fun too, where it's just like everybody's sort of on edge because they know they're in a musical. And again, another similarity with that other episode is everybody knows that like the songs are the thing, or the where you like confess your deepest, darkest secrets and feelings, right? So it's like, the whole thing with La'an is she has this whole thing with a Kirk from another timeline in the previous episode we were talking about, and she's like, I have to like figure out how to get this off my chest before I accidentally sing it because I don't want to sing it.
Yeah. Yeah, and then with Kirk, the one thing that I really remember from that episode, besides like it being a musical, is they did mention his love interest from the Wrath of Khan.
Yes, yeah, that the whole thing where
she's pregnant.
Yeah, I'm not a continuity like geek necessarily, to a certain degree. I don't know that totally jives with Wrath of Khan, but it is like one of those things like, oh, okay, there's a nice little mention of the lore or whatever you want to call it. But that's an interesting little wrinkle.
Yeah, Carol Marcus, that was her name. Yeah, that's like one of the few things I remember from Wrath of Khan, because I watched that for the first time like 8 or 9 years ago. Oh, Kirk has a kid. Weird.
Yeah. They kill him off in the next movie.
Oh, geez. While they're looking for Spock, who knows?
Yeah. They search for Spock.
Yeah, that's right. Because the whole Khan thing, Spock dies at the end of 2. Oh, interesting. I mean, they gotta Spider-Man him somehow, keep him young. Kids don't like guys who are divorced, so let's just kill the kid.
Yeah, right. And even though he's like an adult man, he's like, hello, I'm your son, an adult man. And the next episode, he is dead. And then the movie after that is the one where they go to San Francisco in the 1980s to rescue some whales. So, I guess he gets over it pretty quick.
Yeah, we get to watch. I remember having to watch that for like 5 straight years in grade school. Like, this is your Earth Day video, Star Trek 4.
It's a great movie. That movie rules.
I do need to come back and watch it. That's on Paramount Plus, I assume.
Yeah,
Paramount Plus, not a sponsor, but could be. So let's talk about Those Old Scientists and then Hegemony, and let's get out of here, Matt. So the whole reason I started this journey, Those Old Scientists, starts off as an animated episode of Lower Decks, essentially. And my in-laws, Ricky's parents, they reached out to me because they're like, what is wrong with this episode of Lower Deck or of Strange New Worlds? Because my father-in-law hates animated movies, like or animated anything. Like he does not like animation for whatever reason, even though it's a great storytelling medium. I'm trying to get him to watch a few episodes of the Clone Wars and Rebels just so he has a bit better understanding of Ahsoka heading into the Ahsoka series, which I believe the first 2 episodes will be dropping the day this episode releases. So
Oh.
I'm not sure if we'll cover that with the writer's strike. Obviously, we're not going to cover it week to week, but maybe in a review format. I'm not sure. We kind of covered that talking about it beforehand.
Right.
I'll weigh the options and see how things are looking on the strike.
Yeah,
And,
you got a lot of
also
time
maybe-
for it to
Maybe
go.
the show won't be good, so who knows? Maybe I don't want to open that can of worms with Star Wars if it's not good.
Yeah, right.
But yeah, so Those Old Scientists opens with an episode of a mini episode of Lower Decks where it's all animated. Boimler gets sucked through a transporter or a time portal. He ends up in the Strange New Worlds era in live action, and I love the line that cuts to the credits, which is, "Oh, you look very realistic."
Yeah, played by Jack Quaid, who voices him on the show. And then later in the episode, Tawny Newsome, who plays Mariner, also comes to the past, playing herself in live action. And it's one of those things where, like, the Lower Decks animation style, you can I don't know how much they modeled the characters on the actors who play them, even if they did, it's such a simplistic style that any white guy could play Boimler, right? And in that way. But even so, I was kind of like, how's that going to play? Like when they, it's the same actors. They don't necessarily, they sort of embody the characters vocally, but I don't know how is it going to work in live action. And they nailed it, like it's a little weird because I think that both Jack Quaid and Tawny Newsome are like significantly older than those characters are supposed to be because they're all ensigns on the show. You don't notice it. It's not like, oh, look, Boimler looks 35 or whatever,
Yeah.
It's a lot of fun. They like totally embody their characters in live action. There's like so many little touches. There's a moment where like Jack Quaid as Boimler like shuffles away really quickly and awkwardly and does like
He's doing the Boimler power walk. Yes.
Yeah. From the cartoon. And it's like, God, you completely just pulled it off. Like you can just tell everyone's having a lot of fun with it.
My YouTube algorithm got janked up because I was watching some of this San Diego Comic-Con stuff where they were like, oh, here's the panel for this specific episode, and by the way, it's live. And so now it's giving me like all of the Ready Room YouTube videos that are like 30-minute making of behind the scenes episodes of the episode that came out. And so like hearing Jack Quaid talk about how he like went back and watched a bunch of Lower Decks because like we as viewers, we watch this stuff and we pay attention to it, but like the actors, they don't care. They go in, they read their lines, and then they go home after getting paid. They don't usually watch this stuff unless they're like really invested in the fandom.
Yeah, and I think Jack Quaid specifically has said he, before getting Lower Decks, he was not really a Star Trek guy, as opposed to like Tawny Newsome, who like, is on record as being a very big Star Trek fan. Like it's on hiatus because of the strike, but she and Paul F. Tompkins host like the official Paramount Star Trek podcast, and it's all over that, where she's like constantly just gushing about how much she loves Star Trek. So,
which I think that's so within the Mariner type as well, where she's like super cool and laid back and whatever, but she also just knows everything.
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
It's a really good episode, even if you don't know Lower Decks. Like my in-laws, even with the opening, they were like, what the fuck is happening with my show? What did I click something wrong? Once they got into the live action stuff, even my in-laws were like, this is really funny. This is really interesting.
Yeah. And it's another episode where like this, you wouldn't think it because you don't think of Star Trek as being comedic, but the Strange New Worlds cast is like very good at doing comedy when they're called to do it.
It all plays off really well. And like, I love the moment where Boimler is reworking their tracking system so they can find the Orion ship as a way to not mess up the timeline. He just has everyone turn around.
Yeah. Don't look. Yeah.
I think Una's just like, is this really how we're doing this? And Pike's just like, I'm rolling with it.
Yeah. Right. There's a moment where I think Mariner references Ethan Peck as hot Spock, like to his face, which is
Yeah.
which I'm to understand is like a totally ad lib line, which is just wonderful. It's a really
Yeah.
fun episode.
Yeah, she says something to the effect of like, I was thoroughly unprepared for how hot young Spock is.
Yeah, something like
or
that.
was. Yeah, it is really good. It blends so well. You can be like, yeah, I can see how these two shows are related.
Yeah, and you mentioned the thing earlier with Boimler and like the Spock smile. Like Spock is in this sort of portion of his story in this part of the season where he's sort of experimenting more with like expressing emotion, and so like he smiles a couple times, but because it's in Boimler's POV, basically, it's like treated like a horror zoom in, where we're like, like cutting, like zooming in hyper close on his like smiling, beautiful smiling mouth, like.
Yeah, if it was a TikTok video, you would get the Psycho theme, the re.
Yeah, because for him, he's like he has this understanding of who Spock is that's very similar to like what we understand Spock is from years of TV, and he's like totally horrified that this guy is like laughing, and that's part of his story too. Is he's like worried that something about the Boimler is like very much trying not to change the timeline. And he's like, oh God, did I do something like step on a butterfly or something? And now Spock is like an emotional powerhouse or whatever. Very fun.
Yeah, really good episode. And like most of these episodes, it does kind of stand on its own. So you if you like Lower Decks and you haven't given anything else a chance, you could come into this and be like, okay, here's a fun cast of characters, and we will move on.
Yeah, it kind of gives you a touch of like what Lower Decks is if you haven't seen it.
The sound clip at the beginning of the episode was from this episode, and I believe the outro clip is also from this episode. Spoiler alert. So we talked a little bit about, or we teased a little bit, Chapel and Spock's story, which gets into hegemony. That's a horrible title and a horrible word. I don't know how many. I want to know how many outtakes they had saying that one line.
I mean, it's a real
hegemony.
word.
It's a terrible word. Like someone needs to fix that word. But Matt, one of the things you were complaining about, or I shouldn't say complain, one of the things that kind of bothered you, and I know a lot of people through this season, is I believe at the end of the Charades episode, Spock and Chapel get together, and then the show just kind of doesn't follow through with anything on it. Like there's little hints of it, like in Those Old Scientists, Spock is happy because he's getting to bang Chapel on the side, which can't blame him. Under the Cloak of War, he's trying to help her process having the Klingon ambassador on board, but she doesn't want to do anything. So he's like, well, me helping isn't helping anything. Subspace Rhapsody kind of just completely disregards it, besides the fact that Chapel is applying to a fellowship, and Spock's like, oh no, my girlfriend's going to leave me. And then we get into Hegemony, which is the follow-up from that, and she's just already pre-packed her bags and she's helping already before her fellowship officially begins. But can you kind of talk a little bit about what it is about this lack of showing on the Spock and Chapel relationship?
Yeah, I think it's like maybe like the biggest weakness of the season, and which again, as you've heard, a very strong season of TV. From like the very first episode of Strange New Worlds, they're like sort of doing this thing, this will they, won't they with Spock and Chapel, right? Which kind of harkens back to some stuff from the original series where they're kind of flirtatious and stuff like that. So they're kind of, playing around with that a little bit. So really like it's like a season and a half that they've been sort of building up to this moment where they're finally in a position where they're going to get together, right? And then just because of the way the show is structured, we have 10 episodes in the season, and every episode is like a concept episode. Like it's a big, almost like a movie, right? That this episode, this is the horror episode, this is the musical, this is the the comedy episode, this is the crossover. From there, we don't get much of anything with the relationship, and it sort of feels like they kind of jump to where they want them to be at the end of the season really quickly, right? Where I think in that Uhura episode we talked about, there's like one scene of them like just acknowledging that they're in a relationship. And then like the next episode is the crossover. And, we were talking about Boimler's whole thing where he's like terrified of Spock's emotion being caused by like something he did. And he has this whole conversation with Chapel where she's like, oh, actually, like we are a thing, and he's like, I'm responsible for this, and not in so many words, but Boimler sort of spills the beans, like, okay, well, you're not gonna go the distance with this guy, right? So you sort of sows the seeds of doubt just a bit, of like, oh, maybe she's doubting this relationship now. And the next episode is the Mbenga one, or the war criminal one, where like they have like a totally reasonable disagreement, right? Where she's like in this very difficult position emotionally because like she is reliving her own war experience and like being faced with this guy who she knows to be like a really horrific person during the war. And Spock is like, I just want to help you. I'm trying to help you. What can I do to help you? And she's like, you cannot help me process this because I just have to deal with it. I'm sorry. And then the next episode, the musical, sort of treats that like it was a much bigger like fight than it was. It seemed to me, at least, right?
Yeah, it implies that Spock and Chapel have kind of like distanced themselves from each other because like the response she gave him basically made him retreat a little bit, and he's just giving her a bunch of space, and they're not even communicating, even on big things like her applying for the fellowship.
Yeah, where it reads to me in the moment where it's just like, hey man, like you're kind of being overbearing. I need some space. This is like not a thing that we can just like talk our way out of. I just need to process it, right? Just give me some space. And then and the whole big song, Chapel's whole big song in the musical is basically breaking up with him, right? And not in so many words either. But it's also about like, it is also stated that this is a 3-month fellowship, like,
Which is nothing, especially to a Klingon, a Vulcan like Spock, who
Yeah.
lives longer than most people.
Yeah, so it's just a weird thing where like it does sort of feel like the relationship happens and then they sort of speed run to them being on the rocks for whatever reason, right? Whether it's because we want to make sure that they're in that weird space in the finale where he sort of motivated, he's like Chapel's in danger in that episode, and so that sort of Spock's motivation is like his drama is like what happened to her. It's one of the weaknesses of a 10 episode season, I think, where as great as the episodes are, sometimes you just don't have the time to live in those relationships you want to. And so, we don't know what season 3 will bring, when it will even come at this point with the strikes. You build up this kind of thing over a season and a half, and then it kind of just fizzled out in the back half of the season. It's not like the Next Generation was really heavy into the relationship stuff, right? Like it was much more episodic, where you could just miss a ton of episodes and still come in an episode and get what everyone's deal was with each other for the most part. You can kind of see how in like a longer season, 12 episodes, 15 episodes, 20 episodes, you might space that stuff out more. So like maybe charades happens earlier, and then you have some episodes where we're kind of just checking in on them once in a while, so it doesn't feel like you're suddenly jumping from finally we're together to oh no we're on the rocks to it was bad, that was apparently bad enough that we broke up, with no space in between, right? So it's just a weird thing, and I'm not mad about it, but it's like it's just kind of baffling. It's like
It's a weird pacing concept.
Yeah.
And like even if they found it in the budget to make it like a 13 episode season, like that gives you a little more room to breathe.
Yeah, or if like charades had happened earlier in the season, I don't know. Like I don't know, I don't know how this stuff gets broken out or why you decide to do what episode when you do things like that. But it is just like it's just a weirdly structured in that regard specifically. I think everything else is mostly on point, like with the character stuff and the arcs of the season. But that one is just like, yeah, what's going on here?
Yeah, I don't disagree. It was a little jarring to see what happened in Under the Cloak of War and then jumping into Subspace Rhapsody, where it's like, oh, okay, I guess this is done.
Yeah, and it's the kind of thing where like, I think that song is great. That's like one of the best songs in the episode. But it's also a thing where like it's kind of like the Cloak of War conversation, where I'm coming away with like sort of a different understanding of what is happening than like the show wants me to, right? Where like it seems warranted that there would at least be a conversation, right? At some point, like where these two characters come together and like, okay, so you're like your whole song is about how you don't actually care what I think about you taking this fellowship or whatever. So what does that mean for a relationship, right? Or are we actually broken up or what? Maybe in a longer season or a differently paced season, differently structured season, you would get that conversation, but we don't. So, it feels like they're speedrunning the relationship, and it's kind of a bummer.
Yeah. So let's get into hegemony, and then we will wrap this thing up. So just to speedrun hegemony, we meet up with Nurse Chapel. She's on a planet that becomes infested with Gorn. There's a rescue mission because there's multiple points of interest because it's the Gorn. We've got Nurse Chapel on this planet, and also the crew of the Cayuga is helping like restock their supplies. So you have Pike's girlfriend, you have Spock's presumably ex-girlfriend, and you also have the Gorn, which ties into a lot of La'an and a big overarching villain presence throughout the series so far.
And they're all attacking like the most idyllic studio backlot town you've ever seen.
It looks straight out of like 1990s, the Sandlot. Like it's just this one strip town on an entire planet.
Lorelai Gilmore is about to walk from the left side of the camera and with her coffee.
She's gonna get a coffee at Luke's.
Which is so funny because like one of the funniest things about it is that like they are talking about when they're establishing at the beginning of the episode, they're talking about it and they like mention it as a colony that decided the mid 20th century Midwest is the best way to live. So they're just like, oh, you couldn't figure out an explanation. So yeah, we had a backlot that looks like a city in Minneapolis.
Yeah, it's pretty much the same with Tomorrow, where it's like we need an excuse to film an episode in Canada so we can get a tax break on this series.
Yeah, right. Well, even that has a good bit. That episode has a good bit where like Kirk from the 23rd century is like, we are obviously in New York City, and like while he's sitting next to a big thing that's like Toronto bus station or something.
Yeah. So we get introduced to the new Montgomery Scott. We also find out that Pike's girlfriend, I'm forgetting her name, Captain
Battelle. I think
Battelle.
It's Captain Marie Battelle. I don't think they name her until like way late in the season, but
okay.
Battelle.
Well, that's the trope is you don't actually need to know someone's name until you're going to kill them or put them in danger, because once you put a name to something, you're attached to it.
Right.
And I think you're right. I do feel like I've heard Pike say Marie. So Captain Battelle, captain of the Cayuga, Pike's girlfriend, and she's also infected with Gorn eggs. So we have a new ticking clock. But the episode ends on a cliffhanger because there's a writer's strike. So of course we're gonna end on a damn cliffhanger. We don't know when's production on anything's going to start up again. So we're probably minimum 2 years away from season 3 coming to us.
Yeah,
for this show.
And that's like the I don't know, but whatever the opposite of a silver lining is, right? Where the season ending cliffhanger is like just a really wonderful Star Trek trope, right? Where you're ending the season and then you're ending on that killer stinger where you're like, I'm coming back. I gotta see what happens to this. But when Deep Space Nine does it, it's, oh, I'm coming back in 3 months. Because TV used to be normal.
Because it's the 90s when you only took a summer break and then you come back and start filming and you start releasing episodes for sweeps.
Yeah, where like even if there wasn't a strike, we were looking at a minimum like a calendar year between seasons, because that's how the shows operate now. So I was into it in like the way that I'm like, oh yeah, I love a good season ending cliffhanger. But then you're like, oh wait, in the best of conditions, we're a year out from this, probably more, depending on how long this strike goes. So it's like, oof. And that also kind of makes it tough to judge, right? Where that's another thing with those two-parters, where they don't always feel like a complete episode, because they sometimes are not, right? Where you're writing a bunch of stuff that then someone has to come through 6 months later, or however long between writing, to figure out how that resolves. So I enjoyed this episode. Maybe in retrospect it will suck because the season 3 premiere totally biffs it or something, you know? Find out in like 2026, I guess.
Yeah, I remember looking over at Ricky and we were both just like slack jawed because we're just like, are you fucking kidding me? Streaming shows don't do this. And then I like looked it up just to make sure that we weren't getting like Shanghai or something, or teased that like maybe in episode 11 will
Oh yeah.
sneakily come out and that we'll get conclusion there. No, that's just the end of season 2.
Yeah.
We'll come back to season 3 and find out what happens.
Yeah, we used to be a real country where you could season ends in May. In September your new season starts up.
Yep. There was one thing that came out of this episode that I did want to ask you about. It involves the Gorn, because it seems like in the Alien episode, there's this weird like, oh, the younglings, the babies like fight for dominance, and then they like the sole survivor will eventually get picked up by the pack or something like that. But they've never really, at least in this show and with my limited exposure to them, they've never really shown them as being intelligent. So the fact that they have space suits, spacefaring, and like warp speed abilities just seems really weird for this creature. Can you explain them a little bit?
Sort of, because the whole thing with the Gorn is that they appear in literally one episode of the original series, and it's like one guy, it's one Gorn who's a guy in a rubber suit that Kirk fights, right? So that's not a lot.
Famously.
Yeah, not a lot to go on, but that's the entirety of the Gorn appearance in all of Star Trek before Strange New Worlds. So I think they're trying to build it out a little bit, and you know, I think they sort of allude. I think the big guy in a spacesuit on the destroyed Cayuga, spoilers, I guess we didn't mention that. I think it's sort of an allusion to like that sort of version of the Gorn, right? Where it's like, oh, they're kind of just like big guys, and they're intelligent, and obviously they have some sort of society and in higher intelligence because they can make spaceships. So I think it's a
and
thing.
They can also make like weird antenna that allow for communication disruption.
Yeah, right. So I think they're playing with it and like inventing it a little bit based on, not a ton from the original series. And I think some people were kind of frustrated or upset. People who are really precious about like canon in like the first season, because they are just kind of alien monsters, right? Like very specifically, like you mentioned before, it's an alien pastiche in the first season.
And they do homage Alien again the first time we see the big Gorn in the spacesuit, because you see like the tail hook around, and it's very clearly like that's supposed to be a xenomorph homage.
Yeah. But even that, I think that the idea is like, oh, those are like baby Gorn who are like really vicious and monstrous, and then they become the big guy who is like in a spacesuit and can try and poke away at a console or whatever. So I think they're maybe kind of bridging that gap, but I guess we just don't know yet.
Okay, well, one of the things that left this as a cliffhanger that I forgot to mention as I breezed through this is the fact that the crew of the Enterprise is also abducted by the Gorn. So Pike is left with this like, do I retreat or do I stay and rescue my crew kind of situation? Because obviously the longer he leaves them alone with the Gorn, the more likely someone is going to be infected with Gorn eggs.
Yeah, and he's been like specifically ordered to retreat because like this planet specifically is not in Federation space. Like that's the conflict of the episode. But partially is also like, how do we rescue these people without triggering a war with the Gorn because it's contested space? And so the end of the episode is like Starfleet has said, get out of there now. It's getting hot. And then right as he finds out, oh, actually the people we thought we rescued did not get rescued.
Which again leads to questions about like how the Gorn operate, because they also have transporter technology. They apparently have the ability to decide whether or not that something is an act of war. So like, what are these things?
Yeah, they're just big smart lizard men. May or may not be wearing rubber suits.
Bringing back Seth MacFarlane one more time, talking about I think it might even be like the very first episode of Family Guy, or it's at least season 1, where that nerdy guy is talking about how you like, you can see the zipper here and you can't see the zipper here. You can see that it's William Shatner's body double here and you can see that it's Shatner here. But overall, no, I think this is, especially as someone who is not invested in Star Trek that much, I think this is a really fun show. I think it's a really good watch. Hopefully we didn't bore you enough with this nearly 90-minute episode. We'll see what it is actually after Alex hacks this thing to pieces. Matt, we're going to change things up a little bit here. Do you want to let everyone know about our Discord?
Yeah, absolutely. Discord, it's a chat room service where you can hang out with your buddies, and we have a server. Talking Smack, if you like what we do here, which is to say, if you like listening to me ramble to varying degrees of coherency about things that I like or things that I don't like, and really want that just in text form, Discord's your place. That's where I'll be. That's where we all are. Come on in.
And with that, the link is in the episode description. Don't forget to follow us on all our social media platforms. That includes Lonnie's website, Instagram, Threads, Hive Social, Post News, Facebook, YouTube. We are now on TikTok, and again, Discord. If you have any thoughts, questions, concerns, you want to promo your podcast that you have, or you want to send us some of your thoughts about anything we've talked about or anything we will talk about, just send us an email at tsmackpod@gmail.com. Thank you to Leo Allen for this lovely music that you're hearing right now. Thank you to Beppo for our original avatars, Retro Royal Studios for our Bricky avatar. Please like, subscribe, rate, review on your favorite podcatcher of choice. It helps us out so much. And most importantly, thanks everyone for listening. Take care.
Live long and prosper, Mr. Boimler.
You also live and...
Just pay your writer.